This is CNN Breaking News.
You're in the CNN newsroom, returning now to our breaking news. North Korea with a failed missile launch just hours before U.S. Vice President Mike Pence arrives in South Korea. A stunning development this weekend. I want to go to CNN's Suzanne Malveaux. She is in West Palm Beach near the president's private resort where he is traveling with others this weekend. What are you hearing? Any response yet to this latest development, Suzanne?
Well, Anna, we are told that we're expecting a paper statement from the White House very shortly, an official response from the White House. We are not expecting, our guidance is not expecting to see President Trump address this on camera or in person this evening. So we are told that we're going to get some sort of written statement momentarily. So we are just simply waiting for that to come through on our cell phones, our email, to get the official word here. But of course, this is something that they have been anticipating. They have been waiting for. They are fully equipped to respond to this. This is not what they were expecting. They were actually expecting the potential launch of a nuclear missile, a nuclear test. We still don't really have the details about exactly what was launched, so we'll hear more about that, I'm sure, in this statement that they're going to be releasing shortly. But the president has been at his resort for the last 48 hours, and he has with him his Deputy National Security Advisor, KT McFarland, who has been giving him updates on what is going on regarding North Korea, about the parade that had occurred, the national holiday that had passed without any type of test, and certainly the president now aware that some sort of test has been conducted by the North Koreans. Anna, you know as well as others that they have been preparing in the region for some sort of aggressive move by North Korea. The USS Carl Vinson, the aircraft carrier, and the strike group in the region prepared for any type of aggressive move. And then also we've heard from the president recently, over the last week or so. He has met with the Japanese leader as well as President of China, and what he has said, and some of them are conflicting statements, honestly, but what he has said is that, yes, he has confidence in the Chinese leader that he will get tough on North Korea. He has also revealed in various interviews that he's willing to dangle some carrots as well, saying that he will make a trade deal that is favorable to China to push harder on North Korea. And then he has also tweeted saying that, look, if China is not going to do the job in pushing North Korea to cooperate, to make sure they don't have nuclear weapons, that the U.S. will go alone and do it by itself. So there are many different kind of signals that the White House has already discussed over the course of the last couple of weeks. What is important also, as you know, is that the vice president is on his way to South Korea. He left from Hawaii just a couple of hours ago. We're told he's going to be arriving. This is 2:55 p.m. Eastern Standard Time tomorrow. So he will be on the ground in Seoul tomorrow. And he has a message for the South Korean leadership, the acting president, who he will be meeting on the ground there, talking about the very important U.S. alliance with South Korea, that they will be consulted on a regular basis. He will also talk about the potential of additional sanctions against North Korea, whether or not that would be something that's effective, and the cooperation that the U.S. is committed to with its allies, with Japan, with Indonesia, with China as well. Anna?
Suzanne, what more do you know about the timing of the vice president's trip to the region? This wasn't something that just popped up this week, right?
No, it was not. This was something that was previously scheduled and was something that they felt was very important. The vice president does not really have any personal relationships with the leaders of that region. They felt it was important for him to look eye to eye with those folks and to deliver this message very directly, and also to back up what the president has been saying. There have been a lot of conflicting messages coming from this administration, quite frankly, and that it was important that he actually make it known that we have economic interests, that those economic interests are very important, despite the fact that the trade deal, the joint trade deal was ripped up, that these are kinds of relationships that they still want economic as well as national security interests addressed.
All right, Suzanne Malveaux reporting from West Palm Beach, traveling with the president in Florida this weekend. Thank you, and stay with us. We were watching some breaking news tonight. North Korea with a failed missile launch just hours before Vice President Mike Pence arrives in South Korea. We will have much more on this just ahead here in the CNN Newsroom.
Most trusted name in news. This is CNN Breaking News.
We are following breaking news right now. North Korea apparently attempting to do another ballistic missile test of some sort. We have very few details at the moment, but what we have confirmed from South Korea is that this test failed. I want to bring in right now Barbara Starr joining us on the phone with some new information. Barbara, what can you tell us?
Good evening, Anna. The U.S. Pacific Command in Hawaii has now issued a statement saying that it detected and tracked what they say is a failed North Korean missile launch at about 5:21 East Coast time here in the United States. The missile launch came out of an area along North Korea's eastern coastline, along the East Sea or the Sea of Japan, a place called Sinpo. That's significant because that's the place where they several days ago, also attempted a missile launch, and it failed as well. Sinpo is a military area for the North Koreans. What the U.S. Pacific Command is saying is that they're not yet sure. They're assessing what kind of missile it might have been, the exact kind. They know it failed almost immediately, not clear if it even made it off the launcher before exploding. So now North Korea has had 2 in a row failed launches out of this area called Sinpo, which is also the location of their submarine base. So it's a signal sender, but obviously, they're having a little trouble because they've had 2 failed ones now. We are expecting further information from the U.S. military as they look at the satellite data that they collect and that they try and determine exactly what kind of missile the North Koreans tried and failed to fire. Anna?
So, Barbara, just to make sure I am understanding and our viewers are understanding this correctly, was this expected to have been a test launch or something more serious?
Well, at the moment, I think it is fair to say that this is it's technically a test program by the North Koreans to test their missiles by firing them. They don't necessarily have warheads on them that we know of. They're not meant to attack per se. But look, several of their last launches into the East Sea have fallen a lot closer to the Japanese coastline than anybody wants to be comfortable with. So, a test can very, very quickly become a real-world threat. And that is why the U.S. military, the Japanese self-defense forces keep a capability. The Korean defense forces all keep an anti-missile capability at the ready in that region. There's Patriot missiles in South Korea that could shoot down an incoming missile if it came their way, test or not. The Japanese generally have a ship at sea that can shoot down a missile. The U.S. Navy, out of the Pacific Command, keeps a lot of ships at sea in the Western Pacific for just that contingency. And it's because the North Koreans are so unpredictable at this point. We just all saw that footage of their parade, and they're showing canisters for intercontinental ballistic missiles that, if that was real and they really have those missiles and they really work, could theoretically hit the United States. So everyone in the region and the U.S. is taking this test program very, very seriously. Every test is very much monitored in real time by U.S. military intelligence, and they look at it almost instantaneously with the radars, the ships, and the anti-missile defense they have in the region to determine, is it a threat, and do they have to shoot it down? So far, that hasn't happened. The North Koreans still a very spotty record on successful versus failed launches, but there have been launches that have come within miles of the Japanese coastline. Sure. That's a big problem.
Absolutely. It's a serious situation, and obviously in light of all of the recent heightened rhetoric. Thank you so much, Barbara Starr, for that latest information. Again, now the U.S. confirming North Korea has attempted to do a missile launch that has failed. We'll have much more on this breaking news straight ahead. Stay with us.
Breaking news.
We are following breaking news out of the North Korea area right now. U.S. Pacific Command confirming it has detected and tracked a failed North Korean missile launch. This happening just within the last couple of hours. And as we have just seen their big parade where they had a show of some of the different missile technology that they have been developing. I want to go straight to Will Ripley, who is live in Pyongyang for us this evening. It's, of course, morning the next day there in North Korea. Will, do you get a sense that there is any fear in North Korea of any kind of retaliation for the continued development of their nuclear weapon program?
Certainly when we ask people on the streets here in Pyongyang, they say they are not afraid of retaliation by the United States as a result of nuclear testing, missile testing on the part of their country and its leader, Kim Jong-un. But of course, the answers that we get to our questions are shaped by the fact that this is an authoritarian country. Political dissent is not tolerated. In fact, you can be severely punished for it. And so, and at the same time, you have this propaganda really hammering in this message that North Korea could at any moment be the victim of an attack from the United States, that the U.S. could drop a nuclear bomb or could rain bombs down on people's homes here in Pyongyang or other cities in North Korea. And people really believe this, or they say they do, because that's what you say publicly when you live here. And so, no, people say they're not afraid. And in fact, you have a civilian population where most of the men were conscripts who served up to 10 years in the North Korean military. And so you talk to guys who might be an office worker on the street, and they say they would gladly, tomorrow leave their jobs, put on their uniforms again, and call to arms and fight. They say that's what the U.S. really underestimates, is the people here in North Korea. You have a civilian population with a lot of military training. You have a very large standing army as it is. And don't forget also, if North Korea feels cornered, even if they don't have a viable nuclear weapon or an ICBM at this point, they have a lot of artillery pointed right at the city of Seoul, South Korea, with tens of millions of people just 30 miles south of the DMZ.
And so let's head to South Korea and our Paula Hancock, who is live there standing by. Paula, you were first to break this news about this failed missile launch. We've learned that this happened in the port city of Simpo, and that this is the location of previous missile tests or missile launches that they have done that have also been unsuccessful, right?
Well, that's right. We had one, Anna, just at the beginning of this month. In fact, just before the Chinese President Xi Jinping was meeting with President Trump, and that was seen as a message from North Korea. We also know that this is an area where many of the submarine-launched ballistic missile tests have taken place. There is a submarine base in this area just on the east coast. And certainly from that point of view, we've seen a flurry of activity from this area as North Korea has really been trying to nail down its submarine launched ballistic missile technology. I mean, if you just look at what has happened since the beginning of last year, for example, we've had around 36 missile launches. We've had 2 nuclear tests in just 1 year. I mean, I've been covering North Korea for many years, and never have I seen this kind of intensity of testing of both nuclear and missile. Anna?
And when I take a look back, too, just since February, we have seen this will be the 5th launch of some kind of ballistic missile. We have some new information that we're just getting in. A senior administration official telling us President Trump has been briefed on this failed North Korean missile launch, and a statement is expected soon from the White House. We, of course, have our Suzanne Malvo standing by in Florida and near the Mar-a-Lago resort, so we are going to be ready for that as soon as the president has some kind of statement to release, and we will bring that to all of you at home. Will and Paula, our thanks to both of you. We need to squeeze in another quick break. Our continued coverage of the breaking news from North Korea, a failed missile launch just happening in the Korean Peninsula. We're back in just a moment. South Korea's news agency and U.S. officials now confirming that an attempted missile launch by North Korea failed. And another new development, a senior U.S. official says the status of the North Korean underground nuclear test program as of tonight still remains unchanged. And they say the regime still could conduct a test at any time. We're talking about a nuclear test. Now, again, this was a failed missile launch that we now know has just taken place in North Korea. Meantime, we were there less than 24 hours ago during this massive military parade that included 2 canisters that you're watching on your screen. These canisters are big enough to hold intercontinental ballistic missiles. That's the type of missile capable of reaching the United States. Now, this is the first time Pyongyang has ever shown off canisters of this size. And we could just be looking at empty shells. We just don't know. Let's talk more about this with CNN political commentator, New York Times opinion columnist Charles Blow, and former Lieutenant Governor of South Carolina, Andre Bauer, a Republican. Charles, to you first. I know you wrote a column just this week in which you say Trump is full of pride, obsessed with strongman personas, and absent of historical and geopolitical perspective. This is the worst possible situation. The man who could bring us into military engagement is woefully deficient in intellectual engagement. So, Charles, when you hear about this latest development, are you worried about how the administration might respond?
Well, what concerns me more is that we don't seem to have an articulated strategy for dealing with any of the hotspots, geopolitical hotspots, whether they be Korea, whether they be Syria. I mean, the idea of just flexing muscle is not necessarily a political strategy. And what we, what this administration is running into is the same thing that the last administration ran into, which is the fact that these are very, very difficult things, situations to contain or to control. And we keep kind of, the war hawks keep beating the drums as if capacity is the same as proclivity. The idea that any nuclear state, I mean, what history teaches us is that when states, even when they become nuclear, not that we want any more nuclear proliferation, but even when states become nuclear, they're not necessarily inclined to exercise that nuclear threat. But we keep saying this would make them be capable of doing something. But that's not what history suggests that people who become the states that become nuclear do, because they are also interested in longevity and survival. And any state knows that were they ever to use a nuclear weapon against someone else, they would be wiped off the face of the planet. North Korea knows this as well as we do, but we keep allowing people to beat the drums of war and pretend that this capacity means a proclivity, and that is not what we know at this point.
Andre, do you share Charles's concerns?
Oddly enough, a lot of what Charles said I agree with. I will respectfully disagree with one thing he said is an articulated strategy. Look, President Trump said he wasn't going to continue to give his strategy out to everybody else throughout the world. And I think you saw a very good strategy. He didn't tell anybody. We heard President Obama put a line in the sand, but when the president thought action needed to be taken, oh, by the way, he just happened to do it when he was having dinner with the president of China and let the message be known, he took care of 2 problems. Oh, have another piece of cake, and by the way, we're dropping 59 missiles right now, and you need to do something about North Korea. And what did they do? They immediately did something about it. They sent troops there, and they handled part of what could be our problem. You now see China reacting, which is very progressive, and he had a very good night that night.
Charles, is there any benefit to having a president who is unpredictable and maybe flexible, as he likes to put it?
Well, this is a problem just as an American citizen. Every time we use military action, every time we drop a bomb, every American taxpayer's name is etched on that weapon because our money goes into paying for this enormous military apparatus, right? The idea that you want to keep the American people in the dark is, I find, outrageous. The idea that the president of China would know about the military strike in Syria before some members of Congress, I find to be outrageous. The idea that your concept of flexibility and enigma means that the American people and the American representatives of those people in Congress don't even know what your plans are or what your actions in that case are, I find to be outrageous.
Let me get Andre in to respond to that. Do you, again, agree, and how important is it to you, Andre, to have a better, clear vision of what the Trump doctrine is?
Well, again, I agree with Mr. Blow on several points. He's a very articulate individual. The first thing is, as a taxpayer, I don't want to be a globalist. I like that Donald Trump did push America first. But as Americans, we want to make sure we're safe. And so there are times when the president's going to have more information than I have, and quite frankly, most of the American public. And there are times when we have to trust our president, whomever, whatever party it should be, to make America and the world safe so that those folks aren't coming back to our country. And so he decided this was a strike that needed to be done. He had the meeting with the president of China. And again, around the world now, people are respecting us and fearing us, and he's doing a good job. And people are excited about America First again, but America First means making sure that Americans are protected. And I do, again, appreciate those missiles were over $1 million apiece. So you're talking about $59 million just in missiles. So I'm always concerned about taxpayers continuing to be the world peacekeepers. But now you see the UN getting more engaged in the process, and again, we're seeing results from that.
All right, Andre Bauer and Charles Blower, thanks to both of you. We are staying on top of breaking news right now out of North Korea, where there was a missile launch that failed this evening. We'll have much more straight ahead here in the CNN Newsroom. Stay with us.
CNN Breaking News.
You are live in the CNN Newsroom. I'm Ana Cabrera in New York. Thanks for joining us. I want to welcome our viewers here in the U.S. and around the world as we follow breaking news right now out of North Korea, where an anxiously anticipated missile launch has failed. Still, a senior U.S. official says the threat is not over, warning that North Korea could still launch a nuclear test at any time. Here's what we know at this hour. The missile was launched from a place near Sinpo on North Korea's east coast. The U.S. military says it was able to both detect and track it, and that the missile blew up almost immediately after it was fired. Tonight, this attempt comes less than 24 hours after North Korea put the world on notice, parading its military arsenal through the streets of Pyongyang, flaunting missiles, tanks, and synchronized soldiers in celebration of a major holiday there, the Founding Fathers. CNN is live on both sides of the DMZ just hours before Vice President Mike Pence arrives in Seoul, South Korea. I want to begin with CNN's Will Ripley, right in the heart of Pyongyang. Will, how is this launch being framed there?
Well, it's not even being acknowledged here, Anna, although it does really fit the pattern of North Korean missile tests, a pre-dawn launch, the second launch attempt this month from the eastern coastal city of Sinpo, home to North Korea's submarine base. U.S. Pacific Command saying it was a failure, almost immediately after launch. And what I have experienced in the past when there have been other failed launches and I'm inside this country, it's never reported in the state-controlled media. Of course, a successful launch would be a lead story with pictures of the North Korean leader Kim Jong-un triumphantly overseeing the event. Given that this test appears to be a failure, probably most North Koreans, the vast majority, will never know that it happened, Anna.
And Will, explain the difference between this failed launch and an actual nuclear test.
So North Korea has conducted a number of missile launches, since the beginning of last year, 36 missile tests. It's fairly easy for North Korea to fire these. They probably don't have a warhead inside. The trajectory has them falling in the waters off the Korean Peninsula, although there was a simultaneous missile launch last month where 3 missiles landed within 200 nautical miles of the Japanese coast, prompting a coastal village to do North Korean missile drills. For the first time, they've had missile drills since World War II. So certainly troubling for the citizens in Japan, a key U.S. ally where 52,000 U.S. troops are based. There are 28,000 U.S. troops in Seoul, South Korea, and there's a lot of people looking at the radar to monitor these missile launches. Nuclear tests are different. These are conducted at Punggye-ri. It's an underground nuclear test site. They dig these tunnels deep into the mountains, and these tunnels are built to withstand a sizable, nuclear explosion. And so we've seen the size of North Korea's nuclear explosions, according to analysts who are looking at things like seismic activity, because these create essentially an artificial earthquake. These explosions have been getting bigger. We know that North Korea is trying to develop a larger nuclear weapon. And when these tests happen, the U.S. and South Korea and China will send up sniffer planes, and they'll put out radiation detection equipment to try to see if radiation has seeped into the outside environment. In previous tests, they have been contained to that tunnel area. But the North Koreans they really looked very closely at what President Trump did when he dropped that Moab, the mother of all bombs, on those ISIS tunnels in Afghanistan, because in some quarters here it was perceived possibly as a threat that the U.S. may try to drop a similar bomb on underground tunnels in North Korea. I mean, they wonder, would the U.S. actually try to attack their nuclear test site? Is that one of the strategic targets that could come into play? So this really is, things are always tense on the Korean Peninsula. This is certainly the most tense that I've ever experienced in 11 trips to this country. And we really don't know how the Trump administration is going to respond and what Kim Jong-un is going to do.
And we do know that the president of the U.S., President Trump, has been briefed on this latest missile launch that failed. And we are expecting a statement from the White House any moment. As soon as we have that, of course, we will bring that to our viewers here. But in the meantime, Vice President Mike Pence is en route right now to Seoul, South Korea. He's expected to land there in just a few hours. CNN's Paula Hancock is there in Seoul. Paula, how is South Korea responding to this new development?
Well, Anna, we know there's going to be a National Security Council meeting in a little less than half an hour. This is a meeting where all the top leaders of the country will be trying to figure out what kind of response they can give to North Korea. Clearly, they've had a lot of experience and practice of this. It's very difficult to see what kind of different statement we will see. They always say in the past that they have a readiness posture. They say they will strongly respond if this continues. But of course, it's very difficult to see what they can do beyond that. And of course, bear in mind that there is a political stalemate in this country at this point. There isn't a full president. There's just an acting president, as the previous one has been impeached and imprisoned on a corruption scandal. So, of course, this is a very tricky situation that the Vice President Pence is arriving in. The fact that the people he will be meeting, the acting president, won't even be in power in a few weeks' time. But certainly what the South Koreans want from the United States at this point is guarantees, continued guarantees that we saw from the Secretary of State, that we saw from the Defense Secretary in recent weeks, that the United States is going to stick by South Korea. Anna?
All right, Paula Hancock and Will Ripley reporting from both South Korea and North Korea. We appreciate it, but stay with us. Back here in the U.S., the threat posed by North Korea still looms over the Trump White House. I want to bring in my panel now, CNN military analyst and retired Army Lieutenant General Mark Hertling, CNN intelligence and security analyst and former CIA operative Bob Baer, and from the World Policy Institute, Jonathan Crystal. Jonathan, somebody asked President Trump if the massive bombing in Afghanistan that Will Ripley referred to this week was also a message to North Korea. We heard Will say that some of the people in North Korea certainly thought it was a message to them. Well, this was the president of the U.S.'s answer.
Hey, does it send a message to North Korea?
I don't know if this sends a message. It doesn't make any difference if it does or not. North Korea is a problem. The problem will be taken care of.
So, Jonathan, what was your reaction when you heard that?
Well, I don't think it's news. Dropping a bomb on a country that we have been bombing regularly, going after terrorist groups and Taliban fighters, the fact that it's a larger bomb, I don't necessarily tie those two things together. Now, it could be that we're showing the North Koreans what we have in terms of our armaments and what we're willing to use, just as they are doing. I mean, North Korea, when they conduct missile tests, part of this is to show this is what we're able to do. We will be able to target bases nearby. We haven't seen evidence of that yet, but that's the message they're trying to send. When they assassinated Kim Jong-un's half-brother, part of that was to show, look, we have illegal VX nerve gas, and we're willing to use that. And so both sides have an interest in showing what they are capable of doing, and with the hope that it actually alleviates some of the tension and allows people to walk back.
So, General Hertling, when we were hearing from Will that, these nuclear test sites are underground, it does make you think about why they use this Moab, the mother of all bombs in Afghanistan, because it was an area where there were caves and tunnels. Could the U.S. military use that kind of a weapon to attack the nuclear sites in North Korea?
Now, I'll push back a little bit on this, Anna, and say they certainly could. but it wouldn't be effective. And it would not be the weapon that you would use to hit some of the tunnels and some of the complexes in North Korea. But there are other weapon systems that the U.S. has that could certainly do that. You know, this whole discussion of the Moab throughout the last week has been very interesting to me because I know why they used it in that particular area against that particular target. And it was really coincidental that it occurred right at the same time that this event was occurring in North Korea and right after the missile strike in Korea. Had no connection whatsoever. This was a tactical commander's call on the ground. Now, that's the reality. The perception and the second and third order effects, if other countries believe that we would use weapons like this, then certainly it does send a message. But that was not the intent in this particular situation. I'm sure of that.
Bob Baer, could North Korea launch some kind of a nuclear test now after this failed missile launch to save face?
Yes, I do, and I think they will. I think as the president goes on about taking on North Korea, with or without the Chinese, the North Koreans' normal reaction will be to keep going and keep going stronger. And they said, we will continue launching nuclear weapons. And our problem is, and I keep on going back to this, is absence of intelligence. We do not have sources in North Korea. It all has to be done remotely from satellites, some SIGINT. Their army is quite remarkable. It can move divisions without us detecting them until the last minute. So whether they will or not is a supposition on all of our parts. But my guess is, as long as the rhetoric stays the way it is, they're gonna set up a nuclear test very soon.
And I want to go back to Will for that because I know, Will, you have been there on the ground this past week and you have witnessed and heard of other military movement from North Korea. What do we know about the preparations that have been happening very recently leading up to a potential nuclear test?
Well, we obviously are not allowed to get anywhere close to Punggye-ri, the nuclear test site, but the satellite imagery from just a couple of days ago had showed vehicles, personnel, equipment at that nuclear test site, leading people who have been observing this nuclear test site for quite some time to their analysis shows that they believe it's primed and ready for a sixth nuclear test. And as far as North Korea responding to actions by the United States, we heard some very strongly worded responses to the USS Carl Vinson Carrier Strike Group, threats of a nuclear retaliatory strike from North Korea, which, by the way, isn't anything new. North Korea has many times threatened a nuclear attack to rain fire on the United States and its allies. So that's not new. What is new is there was a special forces operation that Pyongyang conducted last week. It was the same day that we saw, or the images of this special forces operation were released on the same day that we saw North Korean leader Kim Jong-un in person at the ribbon cutting of a new skyscraper that he had ordered built here in Pyongyang. At the moment that we were attending this event with the North Korean leader, their state media put out these images of Kim Jong-un overseeing a special forces operation with commandos jumping out of a plane. The state media release did not necessarily give a motive for that, but when I was chatting with government officials at the military parade yesterday, I was told that special forces operation was in response to tweets from President Trump about North Korea and about China needing to solve the North Korean nuclear problem. Those same officials also said that, frankly, they're not concerned about increased economic pressure from China. Clearly, Chinese trade is helping this country grow its living standard, at least in the capital city. We're not allowed to get outside of the capital. We don't know what life is like for people in the countryside. Clearly, their living standard is lower, but we don't know because we're not allowed to go there. But Chinese trade with North Korea jumped up nearly 40% in the first quarter of 2017. And despite 5 nuclear tests, China has been reluctant over the last decade to really exert a tremendous amount of economic pressure on this country because they don't want to see a destabilized North Korean regime. They don't want to see a humanitarian crisis of North Koreans flooding across their border. But they also most certainly do not want to see any sort of military conflict between the United States and North Korea. In the Chinese view, that would be catastrophic.
And let's just go back through what we know of the last year or so. We know the last actual nuclear test was in September of 2016. Meantime, this year, there still has been a lot of activity of these missile launches that we've seen. In fact, this would be the 5th missile launch attempt just since February. And what we're learning about this latest missile launch that failed is the U.S. defense official now telling us that early indications is that this failed missile was not an intercontinental ballistic missile. So, General Hertling, what's your reaction to that new information?
Not unexpected, Anna. What we saw in the parade today, and both the CIA and the DIA analysts, the direct defense intelligence agencies, are looking at the films and the satellite imagery from the parade today. There were a couple of key items that occurred in the parade. One was a longer missile, intercontinental ballistic missile that went through the parade, longer than what the Koreans call the KN-08 and the KN-14. It was brand new. It was also the first time that they showed a submarine launch ballistic missile. That's important because it's showing that their missile program is growing. But if they wanted to literally show that they had a successful launch, what they're most concerned about is something called a cold launch. That's with solid fuel versus liquid fuel in the rocket. And I don't mean to turn into a geek here, but what it does, it allows the North Koreans to pull a missile out and fire it immediately because it's been pre-fueled, as opposed to taking a missile on the launch pad and then taking a lot of time to fuel it up. When that happens, it's not detected. They can also launch it out of a canister, like a submarine, so it will pop up and then the rockets ignite and then it goes on path. That's the most important thing they're looking at now, as well as connecting a weapon system to the missile, which they have not done yet. I would guess, my guess would be that this was a short-range ballistic missile that they fired out of Singpo, but they were testing the cold launch system, and they wanted a success in that area.
We do know that this was of the same area where they launched that last one, that Scud missile of some sort from the submarine zone there on the port city of Sinpo. Thank you so much for that analysis. Everyone, stay with me. We need to squeeze in another break, but much more on our breaking news. North Korea with a failed missile launch just hours before. Vice President Mike Pence is due to arrive in South Korea. We will go live to Mar-a-Lago, where the president has been briefed, and also to China, a country with enormous influence on North Korea. We'll have much more on this. Stay ahead. Stay with us.